At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, 250 leather-clad bikers surrounded St. Mary's Hospital. Security called the police. Nurses locked the doors. But these weren't the criminals everyone thought they were. Inside room 304, a 9-year-old girl named Ellie was about to face her worst nightmare. Her stepdad was coming, and he'd promised this would be her last night alive. What happened next would make national headlines. But the truth behind why these bikers came, that's the story nobody expected. Before we dive into this story, comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are you in the US? UK? Australia? Somewhere else? I want to see how far Ellie's story reaches across the world. Drop your location in the comments right now. Some stories don't start with darkness. They start with hope, with second chances, with a mother who believed she was building something beautiful for her daughter. Anna Mitchell was 32 when she met Mark Hendricks at a community barbecue in the summer of 2021. She'd been divorced for 2 years, raising her daughter Ellie alone, working double shifts as a nurse just to keep their small apartment. Ellie was 7 then, a quiet girl with paint-stained fingers and a shy smile that could light up a room. She loved drawing more than talking. Her sketchbooks filled with colorful butterflies and sunflowers that seemed to capture the innocence Anna was desperate to protect. Mark seemed perfect, patient, attentive. He'd crouched down to Ellie's level, genuinely interested in her crayon drawings, asking questions about the stories behind each picture. He brought Anna coffee on her long shifts. He fixed the leaky faucet she'd been meaning to call a plumber about for months. He was steady, reliable, everything her ex-husband wasn't. Within 6 months, he'd moved into their apartment. Within a year, they were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with Ellie holding a bouquet of daisies, wearing a yellow dress that matched her bright smile. For a while, it really did feel perfect. Mark coached Ellie's little league team. He helped with homework at the kitchen table. He called Ellie sweetheart and princess, and she started calling him dad without anyone asking her to. Anna would watch them together, Mark pushing Ellie on the swings at the park, both of them laughing, and feel something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. Safety. The sense that she'd finally gotten it right. But there were signs Anna missed. Small things. Things that would haunt her later. The way Mark's smile never quite reached his eyes when he thought no one was watching. How Ellie started asking if she could sleep with the lights on. The morning Anna found Ellie's favorite drawing crumpled in the trash, the one of their family holding hands. And when she asked Mark about it, he said Ellie had thrown it away herself. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? This was the man who'd promised to protect them both. If you've ever ignored your gut feeling about someone, you need to hear this story. Hit subscribe, because what happens next could save a life. The first crack in the perfect family portrait came on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after the wedding. Anna got the call at work. Ellie had fallen down the stairs at home. Mark's voice was shaking, appropriately concerned, and he was taking her to the emergency room. Anna's heart dropped. She left mid-shift, still in her scrubs, and arrived at the hospital to find Ellie with a cast on her left arm, her eyes red from crying. Mark stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, explaining to the doctor how it happened. Ellie had been running down the stairs too fast, he said. She tripped over her own feet. Kids, you know how they are. Always in a hurry. The story made sense. Ellie was clumsy sometimes, lost in her own world. But when Anna asked Ellie what happened, her daughter went quiet. She stared at her cast, picking at the edge with her good hand, and whispered, "I fell." Nothing more. Anna wanted to press, wanted to ask why Ellie wouldn't look at her, but Mark was there, rubbing Anna's back, telling her not to worry. Accidents happen. And Anna was tired. So tired. So she let it go. Ellie's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noticed the changes first. The girl who used to eagerly share her drawings during art time now kept them hidden, hunched over her desk, like she was protecting secrets. Her pictures changed too, where there used to be bright yellows and pinks. Now there were heavy blacks and grays, dark scribbles that filled entire pages. Storms, shadows, figures without faces. When Mrs. Patterson gently asked if everything was okay at home, Ellie nodded quickly. Too quickly, and she never volunteered to speak again. By spring, Ellie had stopped wearing her favorite sundresses. Even as the temperature climbed into the 80s, she insisted on long sleeves. Cardigans buttoned to the collar. Jeans instead of shorts. Anna asked about it once, laughing it off as a phase. Maybe Ellie was self-conscious about her body changing. But when she tried to help Ellie change for bed one night, her daughter flinched away, clutching her shirt closed. asking if she could change in the bathroom alone. Anna stood outside that closed door, something cold settling in her stomach. But when she asked Mark if he'd noticed anything wrong, he kissed her forehead and told her she was overthinking it. Preteens are moody, he said. It's normal. Anna wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Because if she didn't, it meant she'd brought a monster into her daughter's life. It meant she'd failed the one person who depended on her most. So she pushed the doubt down deep, buried it under excuses and explanations that sounded reasonable in the light of day. Then came the day Ellie's school counselor asked to speak with Anna privately. Mrs. Chun, the school counselor, had kind eyes and a gentle voice, but her words hit Anna like a freight train. Ellie had come to her office during lunch. She'd asked if the door could be closed. And then, with her small hands trembling in her lap, she told Mrs. Chun things that no 9-year-old should ever have to say. Things about bedtime visits when Anna was working night shifts. Things about threats whispered in the dark. If you tell anyone, I'll hurt your mother. Things about pain and fear, and a little girl who thought this was somehow her fault. Mrs. Chin's professional composure cracked as she relayed this to Anna, her voice breaking on certain words, and Anna felt the world tilt sideways. The hospital examination that followed was clinical, methodical, and devastating. Bruises in various stages of healing, hidden beneath those long sleeves Ellie had insisted on wearing. Patterns consistent with restraint. Evidence that confirmed every horrible word Ellie had whispered to the counselor. The doctor, a woman who'd clearly done this too many times before, documented everything with photographs and careful notes, her face a mask of professional sympathy, while Anna sat in the corner, her hands over her mouth, trying not to scream. The police came next. Detective Martinez took Ellie's statement with a stuffed bear in the room and a female officer holding her hand. Anna watched through a one-way mirror as her daughter recounted her nightmare in a small, flat voice. And something inside Anna shattered and reformed into something harder, sharper, angrier. This was her baby, her responsibility, and she'd brought this monster into their home. Mark was arrested that evening at his office. The restraining order was issued within 24 hours. He was to have no contact with Ellie or Anna, to stay at least 500 feet away, to surrender any weapons. But as Anna read the legal document, the words felt hollow. She was a nurse. She'd worked in emergency rooms. She'd seen women with restraining orders come through those doors bloodied and broken, sometimes too late. Then Mark called. He wasn't supposed to. Calling violated the order, but he used a friend's phone, and his voice came through cold and measured, nothing like the man who'd fixed her faucet and pushed Ellie on swings. You'll pay for this, he said, his words precise, deliberate. Both of you. I promise you that. The line went dead, and Anna sat there holding the phone, understanding with perfect clarity that a piece of paper wasn't going to stop him. Anna knew the system. She'd read the statistics during her nursing training. Women were most at risk when they left. Restraining orders were violated in more than half of all cases. The police couldn't be everywhere. And Mark had made a promise. She needed something more than lawyers and court orders. She needed protection that didn't come with response times and bureaucracy. That's when she remembered the bikers she'd met at a charity event months ago. It had been a fundraiser for children's cancer research. Anna had been working the event as a volunteer nurse, and she'd noticed them in the corner. A group of rough-looking men in leather vests covered with patches, their motorcycles lined up outside like chrome sentinels. They'd donated thousands of dollars. They'd been gentle with the sick children, patient and kind in ways that contradicted everything their appearance suggested. One of them, a massive man everyone called Big Mike, had handed her a card. Bikers Against Child Abuse. It read, with a phone number beneath. If you ever know a kid who needs help, he'd said, call us. At the time, Anna had tucked the card away, thinking it was nice but unnecessary. Now, sitting in her sister's guest room with Ellie sleeping fitfully beside her, that card felt like a lifeline. She pulled it from her wallet with shaking hands and stared at the number. These weren't just weekend riders or motorcycle enthusiasts. They were something else entirely. The Guardians weren't just a motorcycle club, she'd learned. They were all survivors or family members of abuse survivors. Every single one of them had lived through their own nightmare or watched someone they loved suffer through one. This wasn't charity work for them. This was personal. This was a mission born from pain and forged into purpose. Anna dialed the number. Comment, paper doesn't stop monsters if you think the system fails too many victims. Every comment helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it. Big Mike answered on the second ring. His voice was exactly as Anna remembered, like gravel sliding down a mountainside, rough and deep, the kind of voice that commanded attention without trying. She stammered through her explanation, her words tumbling over each other, afraid he wouldn't remember her, afraid he'd say they couldn't help, afraid of everything now. But Mike cut through her panic with 4 simple words. "We're on our way." 90 minutes later, Anna opened her sister's door to find a man who looked like he could break someone in half without much effort. Big Mike stood 6'4" in his boots, his leather vest decorated with patches that told stories Anna couldn't yet read. His arms were covered in tattoos, his beard streaked with gray, his hands scarred and calloused. He looked like every cautionary tale parents tell their children about strangers. But when he knelt down to Ellie's eye level, this giant of a man folding himself small, his voice went soft as cotton. "Hey there, darling. My name's Mike. I hear you've been going through something scary." Ellie nodded, barely, still hiding half behind her mother. "Well, I want you to know something," Mike continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not alone anymore. You've got a whole family now, and we don't let family get hurt. You understand?" That's when Anna learned what Bikers Against Child Abuse really meant. It wasn't a casual group or a weekend hobby. It was an organization that had existed for over 20 years, with chapters in every state, made up of men and women who'd survived the unsurvivable. They rode motorcycles, yes, wore leather and patches and looked like trouble, yes, but their mission was singular and sacred: protect children from abuse by any legal means necessary. They stood guard. They escorted kids to court. They showed up at schools and homes, and anywhere a child needed to feel safe. They were validators, protectors, a wall of leather and chrome between predators and their prey. Mike told Anna his story over coffee that night while Ellie slept. His sister, Katie, had been 12 when their mother's boyfriend started hurting her. She'd told Mike, sworn him to secrecy, begged him not to say anything because she was afraid. Mike was only 15, didn't know what to do, kept her secret like she'd asked. 2 years later, Katie didn't survive. The guilt, Mike said, his voice cracking in a way that suggested old wounds never fully heal, nearly killed him too. But instead of breaking, he built something. He found others like him, survivors, family members of victims, people who'd lived in the shadow of abuse and refused to let it keep happening. They became the guardians. They became Baka. They became the protection they wished they'd had. "Ellie will never be alone," Mike said, and it wasn't a promise, it was a vow. Ever. Within hours, the network activated like a military operation. Mike made calls to chapter leaders across 3 states. Plans formed over kitchen tables and in garage workshops. A rotating schedule, 2 riders minimum at all times, 24/7 coverage until the trial. Ellie was being transferred to St. Mary's Hospital for continued psychological evaluation and monitoring. The hospital would become the fortress. The bikers would become the army. Anna watched them prepare, checking their motorcycles, testing communications equipment, reviewing hospital floor plans with the kind of tactical precision that suggested some of them had military backgrounds. For the first time since Ellie's disclosure, Anna felt something other than terror. She felt hope, but they didn't know Mark had been watching, waiting, planning his own strategy from the shadows, tracking Anna's movements, noting the hospital transfer, making calls to people who owed him favors. The predator hadn't given up. He'd simply changed his approach. Ellie's first guardian angel was a man called Tiny, which was the kind of ironic nickname bikers seemed to specialize in, because Tiny stood 6'2" and had arms like tree trunks. He arrived at St. Mary's Hospital on a Thursday morning, his motorcycle rumbling into the parking lot just as the sun was coming up. The nurses at the reception desk went visibly tense when he walked through the doors, leather vest, tattoos covering every visible inch of skin from his knuckles to his neck, a beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in months. He looked like trouble. He looked dangerous. But tucked under his massive arm was a purple stuffed elephant with floppy ears, and in his other hand, he carried a coloring book and a fresh pack of crayons. Ellie pressed herself against her mother when Tiny entered the hospital room, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from learning the hard way that big men could hurt you. Tiny stopped in the doorway, reading her body language like a book, and slowly lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged so he was smaller, less threatening. "Hey kiddo," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could bench press a car. "My name's Tiny. I know I look kinda scary, but I brought you a friend." He held out the purple elephant, leaving it on the floor between them, not forcing her to take it, just offering. Ellie stared at the elephant for a long moment. Then, cautiously, she reached out and pulled it into her lap. "What's her name?" she whispered. "Well, that's up to you," Tiny said, a smile breaking through his beard. "She's yours now." The transformation didn't happen instantly, but it happened. Ellie named the elephant Violet. She asked Tiny why he had so many tattoos. He told her each one was a story, and if she wanted, he'd tell her some of them. The ones that were appropriate for 9-year-olds, anyway. She asked why he rode a motorcycle. He said it made him feel free, like nothing could catch him. And then Ellie asked the question that mattered most. "Are you here to keep me safe?" "Yes, ma'am," Tiny said, and his voice carried the weight of an oath. "That's exactly why I'm here." Later, when Anna walked Tiny out to his post in the hallway, he showed her a photograph on his phone. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with curly brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. "That's my daughter, Rosie," he said softly. "She's why I do this. She's why all of us do this." The rotating schedule began that day. 2 bikers stationed outside Ellie's room at all times, shifts changing every 6 hours like clockwork. There was Diesel, a former Marine with kind eyes and patience for Ellie's endless questions. Red, a woman with crimson hair who taught Ellie to make friendship bracelets using embroidery floss. Preacher, an ex-pastor who'd left the church but not his faith, who read Ellie stories when she couldn't sleep. They came in pairs, these unlikely guardians, and they never wavered. The hospital staff went through their own transformation. The nurses who'd initially clutched their phones, ready to call security, started bringing coffee to the bikers during night shifts. The doctors stopped giving them suspicious looks and started asking about their bikes. Even the head of security, a stern woman named Patricia who didn't trust anyone, admitted that she'd never seen a hospital corridor so well protected. The bikers weren't just standing guard. They were present, attentive, watching everyone who came and went with the kind of focus that made potential threats think twice. Ellie started smiling again. Real smiles, not the forced ones she'd been wearing like masks for months. She drew pictures for each of her guardians, carefully coloring inside the lines, signing her name at the bottom with pride. She asked if she could see their motorcycles. She wanted to know what the patches on their vests meant. She was learning, slowly, that not all big men were monsters. That some of them chose to be protectors instead. For 3 days, it worked perfectly. The system held. Ellie felt safe for the first time in over a year. Anna slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. The Guardians maintained their watch, a wall of leather and loyalty that seemed impenetrable. Then Mark made his move. It was Sunday evening, just after dinner service, when Mark made his first attempt. He came dressed in khaki pants and a red polo shirt with a pizza chain logo stitched on the chest, carrying insulated delivery bags, and wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like any other delivery driver making their rounds through the hospital. He'd even brought real pizza, the smell of pepperoni and cheese wafting from the bags, because Mark understood that details mattered, that people saw what they expected to see. But he didn't account for Hammer. Hammer was on duty with a newer member named Ghost, both of them positioned at the hallway intersection that led to Ellie's wing. Hammer had earned his nickname the hard way, 20 years as a construction foreman before his nephew's abuse case brought him to Baca. He had an eye for details that didn't fit, and something about this delivery driver's posture was wrong. The way he walked, too purposeful. The way his eyes scanned the hallway numbers, too searching. And then Hammer saw it, the edge of a tattoo on the man's forearm, partially covered by the sleeve. A scorpion. The same tattoo Anna had described from the photos she'd provided. "That's him," Hammer said, his voice cutting through the quiet hallway like a blade. "Lock it down." Ghost's hand went immediately to his radio. Code red. Code red. Target at north entrance. Within seconds, the entire dynamic shifted. Bikers appeared from 3 different corridors. They'd been positioned strategically, anticipating exactly this kind of move. Mark froze, realizing his disguise had failed, and for a moment, he considered running. But he was a predator, and predators rarely retreat when cornered. Instead, he puffed up, adopting the posture of righteous indignation. "What is this?" Mark demanded, his voice rising, playing to the small crowd of nurses and visitors who'd stopped to watch. "I'm just trying to deliver food. You people are harassing me." The hospital security arrived. Two guards who looked immediately overwhelmed by the scene unfolding in their lobby. 6 bikers forming a human barricade. A delivery driver shouting about his rights. Patients and staff backing away nervously. The head guard, Patterson, tried to assert control, but his voice lacked conviction. This was beyond his training manual. Mark sensed the weakness and pushed harder. "You can't keep me from my daughter," he shouted, dropping the pizza bags now, his mask of civility cracking. "I have rights. This is kidnapping. I'll sue this hospital. I'll sue every one of you." That's when the police arrived, 3 patrol cars responding to the security call. And Anna, watching from Ellie's doorway with her daughter clutched against her side, felt her heart seize. Whose side would they take? She'd heard too many stories of police who didn't understand, who saw restraining orders as relationship disputes, who escorted abusers right past the people trying to protect victims. But the officer who stepped forward, badge identifying him as Rodriguez, took one look at the scene and seemed to understand immediately. He was maybe 40, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen this play out before. He'd held his daughter that morning before his shift, kissed her forehead, promised he'd be home for dinner. He knew what was at stake here. "Sir," Rodriguez said, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority, "there's a restraining order filed against you. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of this building. You need to leave. Now." Mark's face transformed, the reasonable victim act dissolving into pure rage. His jaw clenched, veins standing out in his neck, hands balling into fists. "This isn't over," he hissed as Rodriguez's partner moved to escort him out. "You think some bikers and a piece of paper can stop me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." As they walked him through the automatic doors, Mark turned back one final time. His eyes found Anna's across the lobby, and he mouthed 6 words, enunciating each one clearly so there would be no mistake. "I'll be back for her." Anna's knees went weak. Big Mike appeared at her side, steadying her, but they both understood what had just happened. This wasn't a deterrent. This was a declaration of war. If you believe predators should be stopped at all costs, comment, protect the innocent. Let's show Ellie and families like hers they're not alone. What they discovered next made everything worse. Officer Rodriguez returned an hour later with a file, his expression grim. He'd run Mark's full background, gone deeper than the initial arrest report. What he found should have prevented Mark from ever getting near Ellie in the first place. 2 previous families in 2 different states. 2 previous restraining orders that had been violated multiple times. And 6 years ago, in Oregon, a 6-year-old girl named Sophie had died while in Mark's care, ruled accidental drowning in the bathtub, despite suspicious bruising that suggested she'd been held under. The system had known. Caseworkers had flagged him. Reports had been filed. But nothing had connected across state lines. Nothing had stopped him from moving to a new town, starting over, finding another single mother, another vulnerable child. Sophie's mother had tried to warn people, had called the police in their new jurisdiction, but her claims were dismissed as the rantings of a bitter ex. And now Ellie was nearly another name on a list that should never have existed. Big Mike made urgent phone calls that night, his voice low and intense, calling in every favor, activating every contact. This wasn't just about protecting Ellie anymore. This was about making sure Mark Hendricks never had the opportunity to hurt another child. Ever again. Big Mike didn't sleep that night. He spent it on the phone, his voice carrying through the hospital corridor as he made call after call, each one starting the same way. "We've got a code, Sophie. I need everyone." Code Sophie, named after the girl who didn't make it. The call that meant a child's life hung in the balance and half measures weren't going to cut it anymore. Within an hour, his phone was lighting up with responses. The Iron Brotherhood chapter out of Pittsburgh, 12 riders ready to roll. The Desert Angels from Arizona, 8 members already packing their bikes. The Wounded Warriors, a veteran MC from West Virginia, 15 former soldiers who understood what it meant to hold the line. This wasn't just about the Guardians anymore. This was about every club that had ever stood for something bigger than themselves. Every rider who'd ever made a promise to protect the vulnerable. But something unexpected happened as word spread through the networks. The call extended beyond the motorcycle community, rippling outward in ways Big Mike hadn't anticipated. Firefighters from 3 different stations volunteered to take shifts during their off hours. Nurses who'd treated abuse victims showed up in their civilian clothes, ready to stand watch. Veterans without motorcycles drove pickup trucks and parked them in strategic positions around the hospital perimeter. A retired police chief named Sullivan, who'd lost his granddaughter to domestic violence, arrived with a thermos of coffee and a folding chair, saying simply, "I'm not leaving." Someone posted about it on social media, a local teacher who'd heard about Ellie's case from a friend. She wrote about a little girl who'd found the courage to speak up, about a broken system that had failed her, about ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary. She included a photo of the bikers standing guard, their leather vests bearing the Baka patch, and she ended with a simple hashtag, Stand for Ellie. By morning, it had been shared 3,000 times. By afternoon, the local news stations were setting up cameras in the hospital parking lot. By evening, Stand for Ellie was trending across the entire tri-state area, and people were showing up who had no connection to motorcycle clubs or law enforcement. Just citizens who believed that protecting children mattered more than convenience, more than fear, more than the bystander effect that lets evil flourish. Ellie watched the news coverage from her hospital bed, her purple elephant clutched in her arms, her eyes wide with disbelief. The reporter was interviewing Big Mike, who looked uncomfortable with the camera but spoke with absolute conviction. This is what community looks like. This is what happens when good people decide they're not going to stand by anymore. Ellie turned to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "All these people," she whispered, "for me?" Anna couldn't answer. She'd been holding it together through sheer force of will. The disclosure, the examination, the restraining order, Mark's attempt to breach the hospital. But seeing this outpouring of support from strangers, from people who owed them nothing but showed up anyway, it broke something open inside her. She sobbed into her hands while Ellie hugged her, this 9-year-old girl comforting her mother, both of them surrounded by a protection neither had dared to hope for. By nightfall, St. Mary's Hospital parking lot looked like a motorcycle rally. Over 200 bikes gleamed under the streetlights, arranged in careful formation. Campfires burned in designated areas where the hospital administration had grudgingly granted permission. Tents dotted the perimeter. The vigil had begun, and nobody was planning to leave until Ellie was safe. But 40 miles away, Mark was watching the news too. He saw the cameras, the crowds, the bikers forming their human shield. And instead of being deterred, instead of recognizing that he was outmatched, his rage calcified into something colder, more calculated. He made phone calls of his own that night, to his brother, to 3 friends who owed him favors, to people who didn't care about right or wrong, only about loyalty and cash. If they wanted a war, Mark decided, he'd give them one. He'd been underestimating his opponents, treating this like the other times when victims eventually gave up or the system failed and he walked away clean. Not this time. This time, he was planning something no one expected. By the second night, the number had grown to 250. They came from places Ellie had never heard of, chapters from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, even as far as Tennessee. They arrived on Harleys and Hondas, on choppers and cruisers, the rumble of their engines becoming the soundtrack of safety. The hospital parking lot transformed into something between a campground and a fortress, with tents erected in organized rows, campfires burning in metal drums, and a perimeter watch that never slept. The night watch had a rhythm to it. Shifts changed every 4 hours with military precision, but between the formality, there was something else, a sense of family, of shared purpose that went deeper than duty. Around the campfires, as the November cold settled in and stars appeared overhead, the bikers began to share their stories. Not the sanitized versions they told outsiders, but the real ones. The ones that explained why they were here, freezing in a hospital parking lot, protecting a little girl most of them had never met. Diesel went first. He was a mechanic by trade, arms permanently stained with grease no amount of scrubbing could remove, and his voice cracked when he talked about his son, Tyler. The boy had been 11 when his soccer coach started keeping him after practice, started touching him in ways that stole his childhood. Tyler had tried to tell Diesel, but Diesel, like so many parents, hadn't wanted to believe it. Not Coach Morrison, who'd been volunteering for 15 years, who everybody trusted. By the time Diesel finally listened, really listened, Tyler had stopped talking altogether. "He's 18 now," Diesel said, staring into the fire. "Still in therapy. Still can't look me in the eye. I missed my chance to protect him. I won't miss it for Ellie." Red spoke next, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her face. She'd lost her niece, Melissa, to domestic violence 3 years ago. Melissa had been 22, beautiful, planning to leave her boyfriend. She'd told Red about the abuse, made Red promise not to tell anyone else because she had a plan. She was handling it. Red had honored that promise. 2 weeks later, Melissa was dead, and Red had spent every day since wondering if one phone call, one broken promise, might have saved her. "I can't bring Melissa back," Red said. "But I can stand here. I can be the wall someone needed to be for her." Then Preacher spoke, and the circle went quiet because everyone knew this cost him something to say out loud. He'd been a youth pastor once, beloved by his congregation, dedicated to serving God. He'd also been a victim, abused by his own father from age 7 to 14, told that if he spoke up he'd destroy the family, disappoint God, prove he was weak. He'd carried that secret into adulthood, into ministry, until the weight of it collapsed his faith and his vocation both. "I lost my calling," Preacher said softly, "but I found my purpose. Every child I help protect is me getting a second chance at the childhood I never had." The stories continued into the night, each one a testament to pain transformed into action, trauma alchemized into protection. Ellie couldn't sleep, despite the late hour. She sat at her hospital window with her sketchpad, drawing pictures by the glow of the parking lot lights and the campfires below. She drew Tiny with his purple elephant. She drew Hammer standing tall and strong. She drew Big Mike with a halo, even though he'd probably laugh at that. She drew Red with flowers in her hair and Diesel with wrenches in his hands and Preacher with angel wings. Each picture was her way of saying what her 9-year-old vocabulary couldn't quite express. "Thank you. I see you. You matter." Anna helped her tape the drawings to the window the next morning, and when the bikers noticed them during shift change, more than a few had to wipe their eyes. Tiny asked if he could keep his drawing, and Ellie nodded shyly. Soon, every biker wanted one, and Ellie spent the afternoon at her window, sketching portraits, her art becoming bright and colorful again, her healing visible in every careful crayon stroke. The community kept showing up. Rosie's Diner sent over 30 pizzas. The local Mexican restaurant delivered tamales and rice. A bakery dropped off 3 dozen cupcakes with "Stand for Ellie" written in frosting. Coffee arrived by the gallon from people who'd seen the news and wanted to help. The hospital administrator, initially frustrated by the disruption, found herself coordinating donations instead of filing complaints. The vigil became something more than protection. It became proof that goodness existed, that strangers could become family, that the world hadn't forgotten how to care. Subscribe if you believe kindness is the most powerful force on earth. Because this story proves it, but the fight isn't over yet. The community was united, a circle of light and warmth around one vulnerable child. But 40 miles away, in a basement apartment that smelled of stale beer and rage, Mark was gathering his own reinforcements. His brother, Danny, who'd spent time in prison for assault. 3 friends from his construction crew, men who asked few questions and liked easy money. They spread blueprints of the hospital across a scratched table, marking exits and blind spots, planning an approach that would exploit the one weakness every protective force has. They couldn't be everywhere at once. Mark's brother Danny arrived on Monday afternoon, driving a beat-up Ford pickup with Michigan plates and 3 years left on his parole. Danny Hendricks had done time for aggravated assault, a bar fight that had gone too far, a man who'd spent 6 weeks in intensive care. He wasn't smart, but he was loyal in the way that dangerous men often are to their blood relatives, asking no questions about right or wrong, only about what needed to be done. Mark met him at a truck stop outside of town, along with 3 others from the construction crew, men whose backgrounds were as checkered as the tablecloth in the diner where they plotted. Their plan was simple in the way that desperate plans often are. Create chaos. Use the confusion. Get in, get Ellie, get out. Mark had already bribed a hospital orderly named Kevin Chun, a gambling addict who owed money to the wrong people and needed $5,000 more than he needed his conscience. Kevin provided detailed floor plans, shift schedules for the nurses, locations of security cameras, even the access codes for service entrances. He mapped out blind spots in the coverage, routes that avoided the main corridors where the bikers maintained their watch. The hospital's security footage, reviewed later by police, would show Mark's crew doing reconnaissance over 3 separate nights. They came in civilian clothes, pretending to visit patients on different floors, timing the patrol patterns, identifying which stairwells had the least traffic, which exits were closest to Ellie's wing. They were methodical, patient, and that made them more dangerous than impulsive rage ever could. Then Officer Rodriguez received the intercepted messages. A concerned citizen, someone from Mark's apartment building who'd overheard the planning through thin walls, had contacted the police. The messages Mark had sent to his crew were explicit in their intent. Tuesday night. She's coming home with me, dead or alive. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. This wasn't a threat made in anger. This was a plan, detailed and deliberate, with a timeline attached. Rodriguez drove to the hospital personally to inform Big Mike. They met in a small consultation room away from Ellie's wing, and Mike listened with the kind of stillness that comes before storms. When Rodriguez finished, Mike was quiet for a long moment. Then he said 4 words that carried the weight of absolute commitment. Then we prepare for war. The call went out immediately to every rider on the perimeter, every volunteer, standing watch. Shift schedules were revised. Weak points were reinforced. Former military members among the group, and there were more than a few, began implementing security protocols they'd learned in places like Fallujah and Kandahar. This wasn't a vigil anymore. This was a defensive position, and they had 48 hours to turn a civilian hospital into something that could withstand an assault. They had 48 hours to turn a hospital into a fortress. But on Monday evening, just as the bikers were reinforcing their positions, 2 FBI agents walked through the hospital doors carrying a file that would change everything. Special Agent Patricia Morrison and her partner, Agent James Liu, had been investigating Mark Hendricks for 6 months, ever since Sophie's mother had refused to let her daughter's death remain classified as an accident. The mother had hired a private investigator, gathered evidence the local police had ignored, and eventually caught the attention of the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. What they'd uncovered was a pattern, not just 2 previous families, but 4, spanning 12 years, with a trail of suspicious injuries, emergency room visits with inconsistent explanations, and 1 dead child whose autopsy photos told a story that contradicted the official report. Agent Morrison explained it to Anna and Big Mike in terms that made the blood drain from both their faces. If Ellie testified about her own abuse, it would establish a pattern of behavior that could reopen Sophie's case. Ellie wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a witness. The only living witness who could connect Mark to a murder that he'd gotten away with for 6 years. Sophie's mother, who'd been fighting alone for so long, finally had a chance at justice. But it also meant that Mark wasn't just trying to silence Ellie to avoid abuse charges. He was trying to silence the only person who could send him to prison for the rest of his life on a murder conviction. The stakes had just become exponentially higher, and everyone in that room understood what it meant. Mark wouldn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of quiet that feels fragile, like glass about to shatter. Ellie had barely slept, her small body tense despite the exhaustion. Her purple elephant clutched so tightly that the seams were beginning to strain. Anna sat in the chair beside her bed, holding her daughter's hand, neither of them speaking much because words felt inadequate for what was coming. Around mid-morning, Ellie finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Mom, what if he gets through?" Before Anna could answer, Big Mike appeared in the doorway. He'd heard the question. His hearing was better than his intimidating appearance suggested, and he walked slowly into the room, his boots making soft sounds against the linoleum. He knelt beside Ellie's bed, folding his massive frame down until he was at her eye level, and he looked at her with an intensity that demanded her full attention. "Ellie," he said, his gravel voice somehow gentle. "You see those 250 bikers out there? Every single one of us has survived things that would break most people. We've been where you are. We know what it feels like to be afraid. And we made a choice. We decided that no other child would ever feel that fear if we could stop it. We're not letting anything happen to you. Ever." Ellie studied his face, looking for doubt, for uncertainty, for any crack in his promise. She found none. "You promise?" she whispered. "I promise," Mike said. "On my sister's memory, I promise." Later that afternoon, Anna fastened a silver locket around Ellie's neck, a family heirloom that had belonged to Ellie's grandmother. Inside was a tiny photo of the 2 of them, mother and daughter, smiling in better times. "You're the bravest person I know," Anna said, her voice thick with emotion. "Braver than any adult I've ever met. And no matter what happens tonight, I need you to remember that." Ellie touched the locket, feeling its weight against her chest. Then she looked up at her mother with sudden determination. "I want to meet them," she said. "All of them. Everyone who's protecting me." The word spread quickly through the ranks, and within an hour, They'd organized something unprecedented. 250 bikers formed a line that stretched from the hospital entrance through the parking lot, winding between the tents and motorcycles like a human chain. Ellie walked slowly down that line, Anna beside her, and each biker knelt as she approached, bringing themselves to her height, looking her in the eye. "I've got you," Tiny said. "I've got you," said Diesel. "I've got you," Red promised. One by one, 250 voices made the same vow, and Ellie stopped at each person, handing them a small drawing she'd stayed up all night creating. Simple sketches of hearts and flowers, and the words, "Thank you," in her careful, 9-year-old handwriting. Some of the bikers cried. Most of them did, actually. These hardened men and women who'd seen the worst of humanity, brought to tears by a little girl's crayon drawings. As Tuesday evening arrived, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of crimson and orange that looked almost apocalyptic. Everyone could feel it, the tension in the air, the way conversations grew quieter, the way hands checked weapons and radios one more time. The calm before had run its course. Tonight, everything would change. The fire alarm screamed to life at exactly 10:47. The sound tore through the hospital corridors, a piercing, mechanical shriek designed to wake the dead and send everyone running for exits. Within seconds, the sprinkler system activated, cold water raining down from ceiling fixtures, soaking patients and staff alike. Nurses scrambled to protect medical equipment, doctors shouted instructions over the chaos, and visitors pushed toward stairwells in the kind of panic that fire alarms are engineered to create. But the bikers didn't move. They'd been expecting this. Big Mike's voice cut through the noise on every radio channel. "Hold positions. This is the distraction. Stay sharp." 250 people who'd been relaxed moments before snapped into combat readiness, their eyes scanning their assigned sectors, their bodies coiled and ready. The attacks came simultaneously from 3 different directions, just as Mark had planned. East entrance, 2 suspects attempting breach. The radio crackled with Hammer's voice, urgent but controlled. 2 men in maintenance uniforms were trying to force their way through a service door, bolt cutters in hand. But 6 bikers materialized from the shadows, forming a wall that made the intruders freeze mid-step. Service bay, vehicle approaching fast. Red's voice came next. A white van with no plates was barreling toward the loading dock, its engine roaring, clearly planning to ram through the security gate. Diesel and 4 others stepped directly into its path, their motorcycles positioned as a barricade. The driver had to choose. Hit them and face vehicular assault charges, or stop. He slammed the brakes, tires screaming. Roof access, someone's climbing the fire escape. Ghost called out from his elevated position. A figure in dark clothes was scaling the metal ladder on the building's north side, moving quickly despite the rain from the sprinklers. Preacher and 2 veterans who'd done tours in Afghanistan were already moving to intercept, their boots pounding up the internal stairwell. Every entry point Mark had identified, every blind spot Kevin the orderly had marked on those stolen floor plans. The bikers had anticipated them all. The coordination was military-grade, each team responding to threats without hesitation, without panic, holding their positions like they'd been born for this moment. And then Mark himself appeared at the front entrance. He walked through the automatic doors like he owned the building, confident in the chaos he'd created, certain that the alarm and the simultaneous attacks would scatter the defenders. He was dressed in a hospital security uniform, another detail arranged through his network of favors and bribes, and he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who'd gotten away with everything before and expected to again. He made it exactly 15 feet before he stopped. Big Mike stood in the center of the lobby, water from the sprinklers streaming down his leather vest, his arms crossed over his chest. Behind him, 50 bikers formed a human wall, shoulder to shoulder, immovable as mountains. The fluorescent lights reflected off chrome and wet leather, off tattoos and determined faces, off the patches that declared who they were and what they stood for. Mark's confidence flickered, just for a moment, but everyone saw it. "You can't stop me," Mark said, his voice rising to be heard over the alarm. "She's my daughter. I have rights. You're all going to jail for this." Big Mike took one step forward, and his voice, that gravel-rough voice that had comforted Ellie and commanded respect, dropped to something colder, harder, final. "She's not your daughter. She's your victim. And you're done." The words hung in the air between them like a sentence being passed. Mark's face contorted with rage, his fists clenching, his body coiling to lunge forward. For a heartbeat, violence seemed inevitable. Then the sound of police sirens cut through the fire alarm, growing louder, closer, multiple units converging on the hospital from every direction. Officer Rodriguez had been waiting for exactly this moment, coordinating with Big Mike, ensuring that law enforcement arrived with overwhelming force the instant Mark made his move. Mark's eyes darted toward the exits, calculating escape routes, but there were none. Bikers blocked every door, every corridor, every possible path. He was trapped in a cage of his own design, surrounded by people who'd promised to protect a little girl, and who'd just proven they meant every word. 12 police units flooded the hospital parking lot, their lights painting everything in alternating waves of red and blue. Officers poured out of their vehicles, establishing a perimeter around the entrance, their presence transforming the standoff into something official, legal, final. Mark saw them and immediately shifted tactics, adopting the posture of the wronged party, the desperate father being kept from his child by vigilantes and criminals. "Officers, thank God you're here." Mark's voice took on a pleading quality, his hands raised in a gesture of helplessness. "These thugs won't let me see my sick daughter. I just want to make sure she's okay. They've been threatening me, harassing me. I'm the victim here." It was a performance he'd perfected over years, the concerned parent, the misunderstood man, the reasonable voice in an unreasonable situation. He'd used variations of it with social workers, with previous police officers, with judges who'd looked at his clean-cut appearance and believed him over the broken children trying to speak their truth. But Officer Rodriguez wasn't buying it. He walked through the line of bikers, who parted to let him pass, and stopped directly in front of Mark. When he spoke, his voice carried across the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have your messages, Mark. We know what you planned. We know about the fire alarm, the coordinated attacks, the $5,000 you paid Kevin Chun for those floor plans." Mark's mask cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is harassment. I want my lawyer." "You'll need one," a woman's voice said from behind Rodriguez. Special Agent Patricia Morrison stepped forward, her FBI badge held high, her partner Agent Lou flanking her right side. She held a document folder in her other hand, and when she opened it, Mark's face went pale. "Mark Hendricks, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and for the murder of Sophie Chun, age 6, which occurred on March 14, 2019, in Portland, Oregon." The word murder echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Mark's carefully constructed composure shattered completely. "That was an accident. She drowned. They ruled it an accident." His voice climbed toward hysteria, and then his survival instincts kicked in, not retreat, but attack. He lunged toward the corridor that led to Ellie's wing, his body moving with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. He didn't make it 3 steps. The bikers closed ranks instantly, their wall becoming impenetrable, but, and this was crucial, they didn't lay a hand on him. They simply stood there, bodies forming a barrier that Mark couldn't breach without initiating violence himself. It was the police who grabbed him, Rodriguez and 3 other officers, bringing Mark down with professional efficiency, arms twisted behind his back, knees pressed into the wet floor. Mark fought them, screaming obscenities, spitting rage. "You think this is over? I have lawyers. I have rights. I'll sue every one of you. I'll..." Big Mike's voice cut through the tirade like a blade. "So did that 6-year-old who accidentally drowned in your bathtub 3 years ago." Mark's body went rigid. His eyes found Big Mike's face, and in that moment, he understood. They knew everything. Sophie's autopsy, the bruising patterns, the inconsistencies in his story, the previous families, the trail of broken children he'd left across 4 states, the carefully constructed life he'd built on lies and manipulation and the deaths of innocents. It was all coming down. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sound that felt like finality. As the officers dragged Mark toward the patrol cars, he passed beneath Ellie's hospital window on the 4th floor. She stood there, pressed against the glass, her mother's arms wrapped around her shoulders, nurses flanking them both. Mark looked up and their eyes met, predator and prey one final time. But the dynamic had shifted. Ellie didn't flinch, didn't hide. She stood there and watched him being taken away, and in her small face was something that looked like the beginning of peace. If you believe justice should be served, smash that like button. Every like is a vote that predators belong behind bars. Comment, justice for Ellie, if you're celebrating this moment. The fire alarm finally shut off, leaving sudden silence in its wake. In that quiet, Officer Rodriguez approached Big Mike with information that changed the entire narrative. Kevin Chun, the orderly Mark had bribed for floor plans and access codes, wasn't a gambling addict at all. He was a former Guardian member who'd gone undercover the moment they learned Mark was recruiting inside help. Every piece of information Mark thought gave him an advantage had been carefully controlled. Every weakness in the hospital's security had been deliberately shown to him. They'd known about his plan from the beginning. Every move had been anticipated, every attack point fortified. Mark had walked into a trap of his own design, and the bait had been his own arrogance. Morning came with golden light that felt like redemption. The bikers were still there, exactly where they'd been all night, but the tension had dissolved into something softer. They sat in small groups around dying campfires, drinking coffee that the hospital cafeteria staff brought out by the gallon, sharing quiet conversation with nurses who'd finished their shifts but didn't want to leave yet. There was laughter now, the kind that comes after surviving something together, after standing on the right side of history and winning. Ellie was discharged 3 days later on a Friday morning that felt impossibly bright. The doctors had cleared her physically, and her therapist agreed that going home, to a new home, a safe home, was the next step in her healing. Anna helped her pack the small bag of belongings, including the purple elephant that had become Ellie's constant companion, and they walked together down the hospital corridor one final time. When they stepped through the automatic doors into the parking lot, 250 bikers stood waiting. They'd formed an honor guard, 2 lines stretching from the entrance to the street, their motorcycles gleaming in the autumn sun behind them. As Ellie appeared, they began to applaud, a thunder of calloused hands coming together in celebration and relief and pure joy. Ellie froze for a moment, overwhelmed, and then she saw Big Mike standing at the end of the formation, his arms open. She ran. This tiny 9-year-old girl sprinted down that corridor of giants, her feet barely touching the ground, and launched herself into Big Mike's arms. He caught her easily, lifting her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered into his ear, "You kept your promise." Mike's voice broke when he answered, "Always will, little one. Always will." Anna stood at the hospital entrance, looking at this army of strangers who'd become family, and she couldn't hold back anymore. The gratitude, the relief, the sheer overwhelming love she felt for these people poured out in tears. She tried to speak, to find words adequate for what they'd done, but all she managed was, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me my daughter back." Tiny stepped forward, speaking for the group. "This is what we do, ma'am. This is why we exist." And then the revelation came that put everything in perspective. This wasn't the first time the Guardians had mounted this kind of protection. Over 8 years, across dozens of chapters, they'd protected 47 children from abusers who'd violated restraining orders or made credible threats. 47 children who might not have survived without bikers standing guard. 47 families who'd found hope when the system failed them. The local news stations had been covering the story all week, but that morning it went national. Every major network picked it up. The image of Ellie walking through that honor guard of bikers became iconic, a symbol of community protection and the power of ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary. The story spread across social media, was shared millions of times, sparked conversations about protective orders and system failures, and how citizens could fill the gaps. Mark's high-priced defense attorney took one look at the evidence, the intercepted messages, Kevin Chin's testimony, the FBI's case file on Sophie's death, Ellie's statement, and dropped the case within 48 hours. Mark took a plea deal rather than face trial. Life sentence, no possibility of parole, for murder and conspiracy charges. He'd spend the rest of his days in a cell, finally stopped. Sophie's mother, who'd been fighting alone for 6 years to prove her daughter hadn't simply drowned, finally got closure. She attended the sentencing hearing, and when the judge read the verdict, she collapsed in tears. Justice, delayed but not denied. 6 months later, Ellie's artwork told the story of her transformation better than any psychological assessment ever could. Her therapist kept a portfolio of her drawings, documenting the journey from those early dark scribbles, all blacks and grays and shadowy figures, to the work she created now. Bright watercolors of butterflies, detailed sketches of flowers, portraits of her mother smiling, and always, motorcycles and the people who rode them. Ellie was thriving in ways that seemed miraculous to anyone who'd known her during those dark months with Mark. She laughed easily now. She hugged without flinching. She was learning to be a child again. But Ellie's healing was just the beginning of something much larger. In the 6 months following that November night, BACA chapters quadrupled across the country. Applications flooded in from veterans, survivors, family members who'd seen the news coverage and recognized their calling. New chapters formed in places that had never had them: small towns in Montana, suburbs in Florida, rural communities in Texas. The organization that had operated quietly for 20 years suddenly found itself with resources, volunteers, and most importantly, visibility. People finally understood what they did, and they wanted to help. Then came Ellie's Law. State legislators, moved by the story and pressured by constituents who demanded change, drafted comprehensive legislation to improve protection for abuse victims. It mandated cross-state information sharing so predators like Mark couldn't simply move and start over. It increased penalties for restraining order violations. It provided funding for community protection programs like BACA. And it created a registry, similar to sex offender registries, for individuals with substantiated abuse allegations. The governor signed it into law in a ceremony where Ellie stood beside him, her small hand on the document, making history. 23 other children were protected using the same model in those 6 months. 23 families facing similar nightmares reached out to BACA chapters, and 23 times, bikers showed up to stand guard, to form human walls between predators and prey, to prove that the system's failures didn't have to be fatal. Big Mike received a community service award from the mayor, though he looked uncomfortable in the suit he'd borrowed for the occasion. Ellie's drawing of him, the one with the halo, hung framed in the Guardians clubhouse, a reminder of why they did this work, of who they were fighting for. Remember how 250 bikers surrounding a hospital made headlines? Here's what the headlines missed. This wasn't a story about motorcycles or leather vests or intimidating appearances. This was a story about ordinary people, nurses, mechanics, veterans, teachers, construction workers, who chose to be extraordinary, who decided that protecting children mattered more than comfort, more than convenience, more than the bystander instinct that lets evil flourish in silence. The real story was simpler and more profound than any news segment could capture. People saw a child in danger, and they refused to look away. And perhaps the most beautiful part of the ripple effect is that Anna and Ellie now volunteered with BACA themselves. Anna used her nursing skills to coordinate medical support for protected children. Ellie, with her mother beside her, visited other scared kids in similar situations, showing them her drawings, sharing her story, promising them what Big Mike had promised her: you're not alone anymore. This isn't just Ellie's story. It's proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. If this story moved you, here's what you can do right now. Subscribe to this channel to see more stories of real heroes, people who choose courage over comfort, action over apathy. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Post it where it might reach a parent with doubts, a child who needs hope, or someone looking for their purpose. This story could literally save a life. Comment, "I stand with survivors," below. Let's flood these comments with support for Ellie and her mom. Evil only wins when good people do nothing. These 250 bikers, they're proof that good people are everywhere, in every town, every city, every community. They're construction workers and nurses and veterans and teachers. They're ordinary people who made an extraordinary choice. Be one of them. Thank you for watching Ellie's story. Thank you for caring enough to make it to the end. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes that protecting children matters more than anything else. See you in the next one.